Welcome to session 11 of DML's Small and Medium-Sized Entrepreneurial Training. And in this session, we are going to be looking at management, at personnel and how we handle human resources, about time management, inventory management, and operations. So there's a number of different things that we want to cover in this session 11 as we look at management. We want to start out as we have in our other sessions with some devotions. And today we want to look at the greatest commandment, Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40. And I would recommend that you pause at this time and that you read those verses together. In this passage, of course, it's a very famous passage in which the lawyer is trying to trick Jesus, and Jesus by asking which is the greatest commandment. And Jesus tells a story, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And in essence, as Jesus is describing this, he says to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's what we want to focus on. We've been talking about a social bottom line that follows with the greatest commandment, that we are to be loving people in our place of work. And who is God calling us to love? What I want to focus on in this particular devotion is to look at the words to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly am not perfect in how I love, but I know that Jesus is perfect in how he loves. So my question is, why did Jesus not say, love your neighbor as I love your neighbor? Why instead does Jesus give us the bar of expectation at the point of how we love ourselves? Well, for one thing, I don't know how Jesus loves my neighbor, but I do know how I love myself. And there is one thing that's common throughout the world amongst humanity, and that is that we are committed to our provision, our protection, and our pleasure. We are committed to our provision. We need to have food, we need to have water, we need to have clean air, we need to have clothing, we need to have housing. We are committed to our own protection. We are committed to safety for ourselves and for our family. Safety from any insecurity, danger, also safety in terms of health, also protection in terms of education so that we are able to secure jobs to provide for ourselves in the future. And then lastly, we are committed to our pleasure. We are committed to love, to belonging, to family, to fun. These are things that we want and desire to have. And so Jesus is asking us to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, as we are committed to our own provision, protection, and pleasure, that we also look out for that in terms of our neighbor. And so by having us think about how we love ourselves, even though we may not be perfect in how we love ourselves, we are pretty committed to these things above other things. Jesus is saying, do what you would do for yourself. Be committed to your neighbor in these areas. And so we think about that as it relates to our business, as it relates to our employees, as it relates to our customers, as it relates to those with whom we collaborate, or even our competitors. And we have to ask ourselves, how can I love my neighbor in light of their provision, their protection, as well as their pleasure? And so these are some things that we need to consider. And as we look at this text, it fits in with how we are as leaders and how we do our management. How do we treat our customers? We talked about that in session 10. We want to look a little more closely today at how do we treat our employees, and how can we learn to love our neighbor in the way that God is calling us to do so. Today we are essentially putting the paint on the walls. It is one of the last things that we will be doing in terms of preparing our business. We've worked on the foundation. We've put the walls up through looking at boundaries and personal budget. We've installed the doors and the windows and the roof, and now we are coming back to put the finishing touches on our building by painting the walls to protect us. So there's some discussion questions I would like for you to pause and take some time to do. The first relating to management. First question that I'd like you to discuss is, how many of you have employees? Talk about that. What does that mean to have an employee, full-time, part-time, on contract, on commission, and so on? How many of you have had to close your shop in order to come to this class? And how did that feel? How does it feel for you to be away from the business while your employees are there? How many of you left your business in someone else's hands in order to come to class? So maybe they're not, maybe you didn't have to close it, I'm sorry, but you had to leave employees in charge of it. So some of you had to close it completely, and you know you're losing business in order to be here. Some of you left it in other hands. How big can a business grow if there is just one person? Is there a limit to what you are able to do? And how do you make decisions when to grow your business next? Many of you said that the reason you enjoy owning a business is because you don't like to be bossed. Rather, you like to be your own boss. Why is that? What is at the root of that for you? And what will you do differently than what you have seen other bosses do? So chances are, if you said that there's a limit to what you can do as one person, then you will need to employ people. How are you going to be different than the people that you were choosing to leave so that you could have your own business? And what are some of those challenges? So I'd like for you to pause and to have a discussion and then come back and we will carry on. Okay, I hope you had a good discussion. One of the things that we see is that there is a difference between a boss and a leader. And I hope you had some discussion about how you will be different from other bosses that you had that maybe didn't treat you very well. But this chart shows, and this is in your manual as well, this chart shows the difference between a boss and a leader. A boss drives employees while a leader coaches them. Okay, so a boss is driving, it's pushing, it's not necessarily walking alongside with. A boss depends on authority, a leader depends on goodwill. A boss inspires fear, and a leader generates enthusiasm. A boss says, I did this, whereas a leader says, we did this. A boss places blame for the breakdown, whereas a leader will fix the breakdown. A boss knows how it is done. A leader shows how it is done. A boss uses people. A leader develops people. A boss takes credit. A leader gives credit. A boss demands. A leader asks. The boss says go, and the leader says let's go. And so those are some pretty critical differences. And your people who work for you know whether you fall into one category or another. The question is whether or not you know whether you fall into one category or another, or if there are some things that you can improve upon in order to be a better leader. And of course, what we know is that those who are led well will be able to thrive and to flourish, whereas those who are not led well will tend to run out of energy and want to move on. We are called to be servant leaders. What does this mean? The servant leader is servant first. It begins with a natural feeling that one wants to serve and serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. That person is sharply different from the one who is leader first. And so that's one thing that we want to be able to look at ourselves too. Do we have a natural feeling, a natural desire to serve? And then out of that serving, a leadership position might grow, but the person who wants to be a leader first might have a different motivation than the person who is a servant leader. Servant leader has these following characteristics. In the center there, a servant leader is going to be committed to stewardship, committed to people, and to building community. A servant's characteristics, just as a servant, are listening and hearing, empathy, as well as healing. And a leader's characteristics on the right-hand side is awareness. They are usually aware of things from a bigger picture. Persuasion, they are able to help people get on board with that. Conceptualization, they are able to conceptualize, to break down into pieces the different steps. And they have foresight. They are able to see into what needs to happen and to maybe mitigate against some challenges. And so as a servant leader, we see the combination of all of these wonderful characteristics coming together. Whereas if you are a leader by itself and you are not listening, hearing, having empathy, committed to people, building community, you may be a good leader, but you are missing some key characteristics that will help bring people on board. Being a servant leader, of course, there's a paradox. And a paradox is that it doesn't necessarily make sense. They seem like they might conflict to be a servant and a leader at the same time. And so this chart does a nice job of playing that out, of explaining it. And so a servant leader is great enough to be without pride. So you read it from the left with the words enough to, and then on the right. A servant leader is planned enough to be spontaneous. Okay, so a servant leader understands, the leader is a part who understands planning, but being a servant means that sometimes we need to be spontaneous and we need to keep that in balance. A servant leader is compassionate enough to be disciplined and to discipline. All right, so you have compassion for people. That's a good thing. That's the servant part. But the leadership part says, I'm compassionate enough that I'm going to instill some discipline here so that we also continue to raise ourselves to a new level. A servant leader is right enough to say, I'm wrong. Believes in themselves, is confident enough that they can say that they are wrong. A servant leader is serious enough to laugh. Okay, we need that balance as well. Is wise enough to admit you don't know. And that's really a wise thing to be able to do, is to say, I don't have the answers. Is busy enough to listen. Is strong enough to be open to change. And that can be very threatening for some leaders who are not servant leaders. Looking at changing the way we do things or not being right can feel very threatening, but a servant leader desires first to submit themselves to the people around them and then still take leadership in that. And a servant leader is leading enough to serve. And so there is that paradox. There is a contradiction, what feels like a contradiction, but there needs to be a balance between these two. As we stated in session 2, way back in session 2, we talked about the purpose for business from God's perspective. And we said two things: to provide the community with goods and services that will enable it to flourish. And that means that the customer is what is one of the main purposes for business. But the one we want to focus on in this session is to provide opportunities for meaningful work that will allow employees to express their God-given creativity. And that's the second main purpose for business from God's perspective, to allow employees to have meaningful work, to allow them to flourish so that their God-given creativity can come out. And that's what it means to be a servant leader. That's what it means to be a leader rather than a boss, is that you are looking to help your customer flourish as well as your employees flourish. Because when they flourish, your business will also flourish. To determine where you might be as a servant leader, ask yourself these questions. First, am I providing an environment that helps people develop their skills, their knowledge, their spirituality, their intellectualism, and this has to do with their competence? So ask yourself whether you are providing an environment for people to develop their skills, their knowledge, their spirituality, their faith, and their intellect. Do they have opportunities to learn and grow? So increasing their competence. The second is, are they become healthier, wiser, freer? Are they becoming more autonomous? Are you helping to develop their capacity? And these are critical questions. People want to have their competence and their capacity to be increased. And so ask yourself whether people who are working for you are experiencing that. The third, am I providing an opportunity for my employees to express their creativity and their potential? And if you aren't sure, it'd be good to sit down and have a conversation with them and see what their answers might be. So we want to look at those competencies and capacities and how those are really grown. And so what does it mean if you are working to help grow the competencies of your employees? Well, competencies are learned in three different ways, in three different environments. The first is informally. And an example of this comes from Deuteronomy 6:6-9. And you must commit to these commands. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed and when you are getting up. Tie them on your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. So this is one way in which we learn. So for our employees and for us ourselves, we learn as we are going about our environment, as we are talking and walking, as we eat lunch together, as we have coffee together. We have signs in the building. There is a way that we teach competencies informally without necessarily going to the formal environment and in a classroom, so to speak. So 80% of our competencies in life are learned simply by growing up around people who are competent. Modeling, playing, pretending, and simply doing are the greatest determinant to your competencies in life. And that's why so many of us grow up to do jobs that are similar to our parents. We've learned from their competencies. We've watched, we've observed. But also our faith comes from that, our ethics comes from that, our morals comes from that. We watch and we learn, and it's an informal learning where 80% of our competencies in life come out of. The second category is non-formally. Luke 24, verse 32 is an example of this. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scripture to us?" And so informally is we're still intentional with it. We put it up in different places. We talk about it as we do our things. Non-formally is less formal than that. So we're not having any formality to it. It's as we are hanging out, as we're talking, as we're doing different things that we still continue to learn in those environments. And then the last one is formally. And of course, this would be in schools and in universities. And Ezra 7, verse 10 is an example of this. This was because Ezra had determined to study and obey the law of the Lord and to teach those decrees and regulations to the people of Israel. And so there can be a formal competency that's learned. And so for a lot of employers, they like to give the formal opportunities to their employees to develop their skills, to further their competencies. But we need to not overlook the informal opportunities as well as the non-formal opportunities and how those have an impact on people. Next, we want to look at capacity. How do we develop capacity in our employees? Seizing opportunity without capacity wastes energy and resources, and it could be dangerous. And so here you have a lion who's looking at this opportunity of the rhino, probably doesn't have the capacity to take that opportunity on by herself, and so it'll be a waste of energy and resources. And so we need to be able to size up the opportunities that we have to decide whether we have the competency for them as well as the capacity in order to be successful. Increased age should lead to increased capacity. Job 12:12 says, "Wisdom belongs to the aged and understanding to the old." And so as you grow in competency, so in your knowledge, you're also growing in wisdom in this case. Your capacity is explained as wisdom in this case. So as you increase in age, you learn from mistakes. You learn based on what you've observed and what you've done, even when you failed. We sometimes at 20, we believe that we can do anything. At 30, we want to do something. At 40, I see what I could have done. At 50, I wonder why I did what I have done. And at 60, I settle down to do what can be done. And so we see a growing wisdom that comes from that, from I can do anything to wanting to do something to seeing that maybe I didn't do what I should have done, and then finally settling down to do what we can do. And there's a wisdom that comes from that. And people have different levels of capacity. We see that in the parable of the talents as well. One is given 5, one is given 2, one is given 1, according to their abilities, their capacity to be effective. T.D. Jakes said this: "Give a church of 100 people to a pastor who has the capacity to be a pastor for 1,000 people, and 900 people will come. But if you give a church of 1,000 people to a pastor who has the capacity for 100 people, and 900 will leave." And so the reality is sometimes we have a given set of abilities and giftings and capacity. We can develop it further, but sometimes we have a unique gifting for a certain size, and we need to be content with that and understand who we are. And sometimes it takes that wisdom to say, I know you want to promote me, you want me to be in this position, but I don't have the capacity for that. It's not something that God has gifted me to do. Capacity building requires intentional planning. Proverbs 21 verse 5 says, good planning and hard work leads to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. And so what capacity building have we put into our business and for our employees, for our children, for those we are mentoring? There needs to be some intentional planning in order for that to happen. So when we compare again managing versus leading, we see that servant leaders build environments where others have the opportunity to grow in their skills and in their capacity. Focusing only on what needs to be done today misses the opportunity and the potential of tomorrow. And this is a challenge because I've heard many leaders complain about the fact that they invest in people. They are focusing on tomorrow. They are focusing on the opportunity that they see in person A or person B. They help them increase their competencies and their capacity, and then that person leaves and goes to a different business and somebody else benefits. And that's a risk. But I think the calling remains the same. Our calling is to help develop people, to help them flourish. And in response, they do work for you. You can ask for some commitments. That if they do have certain educational opportunities, that they make a commitment to stay for a certain period of time so that you also can benefit from that. But I think that because some people may not follow through with that, it doesn't stop us from continuing to do the right thing on our side, which is to develop capacity and competencies. Managers tend to focus on operations, on systems and procedures, whereas leaders tend to focus on the bigger picture or vision and tend to be able to bring people alongside them. Okay, so managers might be more focused on the system and the details, whereas leaders might be more focused on the big picture. Both leaders and managers need to be able to make things happen, and that requires power and influence, authority and accountability, as well as effective ways to delegate. So this is something that is needed for both leaders and managers. Need to be able to take steps to put things into action, to make decisions, to delegate in a way that also has supervision and authority in that as well. And so we look at 7 skills of management. The first skill of management is planning, and that one is where we use our brain more than our back. What is God's desire? What are his outcomes for my business according to an economic bottom line, an environmental bottom line, a social bottom line, and a missional bottom line? From our planning, we then set our goals. What do I hope to achieve in 6 months, in 1 year, in 3 years, and so on? Then we need to be able to make decisions. That's a critical part of being a leader or a manager, is to be able to make the hard decisions to start moving in a direction. The fourth is delegating. Once you've made your decision and you've got your plan in place, now you need to start delegating and having people that you can trust to delegate these plans to. Number 5 is providing support. Once you delegate, you need to continue to provide support. People need to know that they are part of a team. We need to be intentional about providing that support, hearing and listening, empathy for how people are doing, whether they're feeling fulfilled, whether they are running into challenges, and if so, how can the team work together to help get through those, and so on. Number 6, another key skill of management is communicating. Knowing how to listen and knowing how to communicate in a way that is effective. There's a lot of people that talk, but not a lot of people, or there's a lot of people that hear, but not a lot of people that listen. There's a lot of people that talk, but not a lot of people that communicate. And so understanding what the barriers are that you have in both in communicating and listening and in talking and speaking will be helpful for you to be a better manager. And number 7 then is controlling to plan. So we can set great plans, we can set goals, we can delegate, and then we're off and running. But if you don't control to plan, meaning continue to come back to the plan to say, are we making it? And if not, how can we correct? And if we are, what is the next step? That is a key part of management. sometimes we spend a lot of time on planning and on goal setting, and then we are happy with it, and we get to work, and within a month we've forgotten what it was we said we wanted to do. So it's another key skill of management. A few things about successful companies that we can learn from. The first is that they spot fundamental changes in the world and create opportunities from them before these changes take hold in the general population. And so successful companies are not only looking at themselves, but they are looking around at the industry. They are looking around at the sector. They are looking at what changes are coming in the world, and begin to do some acting on that before things have gone too far. And so a problem or a need is an opportunity in disguise. And that's one of the things that we say over and over is you don't have problems, you have opportunities. But you need to see with eyes that can spot those opportunities rather than looking at the negative problems. Successful companies watch trends. For example, A, increase in global competition as the world becomes smaller through the internet and easier access to to transportation. And so the successful companies will watch trends like that. As transportation becomes easier, as the internet becomes more prevalent in various communities, what can your company do to help fit into that trend that will help it grow? Another trend is the declining birth rate and the variance in age distribution in the developed world. This factor will make finding skilled workers more challenging. Companies are starting to pay attention to Africa for this reason, as its population is young. So what does it mean that there's a declining birth rate? What does it mean for you and your business? That's a trend that is happening. And the general population in the world is getting older. What does that mean for you? What does it mean that it will be more difficult to find skilled workers in some areas? And those are some things. People are moving more towards urban than rural. Paying attention to these trends and figuring out how it fits into your business is important. A third trend has to do with how disposable income is spent, with a shift towards convenience and flexibility. People more and more are choosing to have food delivered to them. They are choosing to have meals delivered to them. It's about convenience, and people are willing to part with their money in order to have that convenience. And so disposable income used to be, when I was growing up, we never went out for dinner. It's hard for me to remember a time when I went out for dinner with my family. And yet now that is pretty commonplace. And so we have to think about the fact that disposable income is changing how people use it. And what does that mean for our business? Successful businesses, so that was number one. They look at problems or needs as an opportunity to disguise. Number two, they use teams to innovate and develop products quickly. And so as you see things change, as you see demands changing, you're able to change up your product as well so that you can meet those demands. Successful companies form partnerships with other companies in their industry. And that is something that we need to see a lot more in the various markets in Africa. Rather than 50 people selling the same thing in a small area, which is not efficient for getting inputs for customers and so on, forming more partnerships, looking for collaborators rather than looking at others as just competitors. And then successful companies put the customer at the center of everything that they do, and we looked at that very closely in session 9. Part of being in management means that we need to also manage the production process. There are 5 problems to solve when it comes to production. If you are involved in a business that is involved in producing things, then these 5 problems are things you need to consider. Capacity, how much can I produce? What is my potential? And that has to do with being realistic. You may desire to serve everybody in your community, but you may not have the capacity. So what is your capacity? Scheduling, how am I going to do it? Who is going to help do it? And how is it going to get done? And so when we don't manage our scheduling well to make sure that we have A, B, and C parts in stock so that we can produce item D, we can sometimes end up with production just being stalled for no good reason other than that the products didn't arrive in time. So scheduling is critically important in the production process. Inventory, how much inventory is there and how can I reduce it? And of course, we know that inventory, the stock that we have, it's not gaining any money for you, it's just sitting there. And so the importance of keeping stock constantly moving is very, very important if you want to see your assets continue to grow. So how much inventory do I have? How can I reduce it? What is the problem? Maybe I need to reduce the price to get rid of this. But something needs to happen to keep that inventory moving. The fourth, standards. What do I consider efficient production and quality output? What are my standards? What are my expectations? Do I have an efficient system? Can it be more efficient? What do the employees expect? What are the expectations in terms of output? And if I change that, will I be decreasing the quality? So what are the standards that I want to have? There are standards that the government has, for sure. Customers may have different standards, higher standards than the government, and where do I fit into all of that? And the last one, the control. Is the production process working? Focus on the process quality, not the end result quality, and you need to see your own standards for each country in that. And so looking closely at the production process and focusing on the process of the quality of the process, not necessarily the end result in this case, so that you can see how the process is working for you. So those are 5 different things to look at when it comes to production. As we think about business, we think about how risky business is, and there are many different risks that we need to consider, but sometimes we need to first evaluate how risky we are as individuals. So how many of you would jump out of an airplane with a parachute? Usually when we ask this question, we get maybe a few hands in the group, but definitely not a majority. How many of you would ride an elephant? That's a little bit less risky, right, than jumping out of an airplane. So raise your hand if you would be willing to ride an elephant. Okay, again, you have a few more hands that went up usually than with the airplane. The next one, how many of you would ride a horse? Again, a horse is more safe than the elephant, right? It's smaller. It's been more designed for or used more often for being ridden. And then the last one, how many of you would ride a donkey? Now, I'm not saying you want to ride a donkey, but would you be willing to take a risk to ride a donkey? And usually by this point, we see a lot more hands. And so we can see that we all have different risk levels of what we are willing to do, both in terms of our safety, but also in terms of business. And it's important to know what our risk level is and what our comfort level is. And so we want to look at the risk that we take in doing business. And there's 10 different risks that we need to be aware of and figure out how to mitigate against those. The first is a financial risk. Investing your money, your talents, and your time into a business is risky, as those resources could go elsewhere. And so that one is the one we think of the most quickly. Business is risky. You invest your capital, you invest your time, and it could all go upside down and you could lose that. So financial risk is definitely a big risk. A second one is the currency or exchange risk. Fluctuations in the exchange rate of your country, the monetary unit that you use, can affect anyone dealing with imported materials or exporting materials. So if you are involved in anything that involves an exchange rate challenge, it becomes very risky. So for example, if your currency is devalued, suddenly the price that you bought things for or to replace that is going to be very difficult to do, and so it becomes a risk for you. The third is a credit risk. Most businesses feel compelled to extend credit to customers, and this can be risky. So you extend people credit, you do that on faith, you do that in trust, you do it because of relationships, and then people don't honor it, they don't pay it back. That becomes a credit risk that you now need to absorb if you're not able to figure out how to collect on it. Fourth type of risk, security risk. Having capital, inventory, or resources puts the business at risk for those who want to steal. And so often we will have insurance to mitigate against that type of a risk. But as soon as you start accumulating wealth, as soon as you start accumulating assets, there could be some people looking at you to figure out how to get what you have secured. Number 5, property risk, the risk of financial loss as a result of owning real estate. Storms, floods, so many different things that can happen to your property. And even if it's civil unrest, fire, all of these different things is a property risk that we have. Number 6, a regulatory risk. Businesses are often at the mercy of the government as it relates to regulatory obligations and fees, including tax rates, registration, and licensing. And as countries continue to seek to protect their people from things that are insecure as it relates to products, they may also be increasing regulations, and that will have a negative effect on your business in terms of financially. But it may still be a good thing for the country and the people overall. But those are risks that you take. When you started, you may have had no regulatory obligations, and now you may have many that you have to deal with, and that can be frustrating. Number 7, legal risk. When you sell a product or service, you are at risk of being sued by customers who feel you didn't deliver what you promised, or even worse, if any harm comes as a result of using your product or service. So when you start a business, there is a legal risk that you take. If you are doing somebody's hair and suddenly their hair falls out a week later, you stand a legal risk, especially hospitals as well, doctors, and so on. It happens a lot more in the West than across Africa, but unfortunately that may be changing as well. Number 8, information technology risk. Hacking is becoming an increasing issue as more and more purchases are done online. Protecting your customers and their business financial information is risky. And we've seen so many cases of that where somebody's entire business, all their customers were hacked and the financial information was stolen and used. And so this is a risk that is there, but if you want to be able to have people purchase things online from you, there is a risk in that as well. Number 9, country or political risk. If a country experiences political instability, businesses usually feel an immediate effect as people stop spending, start saving, or leave. I remember when in 2008, when the U.S. had a recession, we were at a negative savings rate as a country. Before that, people were spending more than what they were earning, and so there was a negative savings rate. As soon as the recession hit and people had less money, suddenly they remembered how to save and they stopped spending as much. And so if your country has a risk, then that can affect the economy and your business as well. Right now, of course, with COVID-19, as I'm taping this, we have businesses that are shut down all over who are not able to do their business. And of course, that is going to have a massive negative impact on many businesses. Number 10, reputational risk. Happy customers tell 3 people, unhappy customers tell 3,000. When you do business, you're putting your reputation at risk for unhappy customers. And so you don't want to be known as the person who had the business that did A, B, and C, where people are talking negatively. But that's part of the risk of doing business. And so there's a lot of different risks, and we know them, we're aware of them. We don't always like to think about them. But it's important that we know how to manage these risks that we face. And so the first thing we want to do is prevention, think through prevention and safety procedures. So how can you mitigate against customers being hurt or injured, or employees being hurt or injured, either from the product or on site? Those are important things to have. What will you do in the case of flooding? What will you do in the case of fire? Do you have fire extinguishers? Do you have smoke detectors, and so on? The second tool to manage risk is to control the environment, and that is to make sure that you have the walls up to protect from people coming in, that you have security cameras up, that you've done what you can do to make sure that the environment is as safe as it can be. Monitoring then is important. Monitoring your inventory from theft, monitoring people's hours to make sure that they are getting enough rest so that they don't make careless mistakes due to fatigue, and so on. Another tool for mitigating against or managing risk is insurance. A lot of people have insurance on their property, but they also may have insurance on their contents, on their inventory. You have life insurance. You can offer health insurance for your employees. And all of these things will help the business in case there is a problem. Another thing people like to do is to hedge, to not put all of their eggs in one basket, but to hedge by having different businesses, by having different lines within their business, so that if there's a problem with one, they are able to focus on the other ones. So, for example, literally about eggs, you might have layers. You may have a poultry farm where you have layers, but maybe you also have broilers at the same time, or maybe in case you get a lot of eggs coming in to Kenya from Uganda, for example. Maybe you have poultry, but as a way of hedging, you also have pigs. Or other such things. So trying to diversify your income stream so that if there's a problem in one sector or one industry, you don't lose everything. The sixth one is having a response plan and a resilience plan. And so what will you do if A, B, or C happen, and making sure that you're thinking about the worst case scenarios. And sometimes we don't want to do that. We think that thinking about having insurance is a way of bringing on the bad thing. Coming up with response plans, learning how to be resilient in those things is a way of bringing it on, but it's not. It's called being stewardly of the resources and the business that God has given you, and in order to manage it, you need to have a plan for mitigating as well as eliminating the threat. One of the big threats that we can have in our business is our workforce, and we believe that we are called upon to have people work for us in order to help them increase their creativity, in order to help more customers benefit from the flourishing that we have, that we offer through our product or service. But sometimes people feel very threatened about having employees and what their employees could do to their business. So how do we promote creativity without losing productivity? What encourages this, and what stifles this? And so I'd like for you to have a discussion about these two questions. How do we promote creativity in our employees without losing productivity? And what encourages creativity, and what stifles creativity in our employees? I'd also like for you to discuss the 10 risks that we just discussed, and talk through what your plans are for that, how you deal with some of those. And those are all listed in your manual, the 10 different types of risk, as well as the tools to manage your risk. So have a discussion. Take some time to discuss these questions as well as risks, and then we'll come back. Okay, I hope you had a good discussion, and we want to move on to talk more about workplace management. Hiring people to work for your business is a cost, but it can benefit your business in many ways. Hiring people whose creativity matches your potential is one way to help ensure the growth of a business. And so we know that there is a cost to it and there is a risk to it, but it also will ensure growth and help you to become a stronger business. So what are the challenges of hiring someone? As I just said, it is another fixed cost added to your business. You or the qualified personnel in your business need to spend time training each employee to reach their full capacity. So that takes time to develop people. It takes time to pour yourself into them so that they too can flourish. It's another challenge. You must work to build trust within the staff by holding each other accountable to responsibilities and respecting the property of the business. And so establishing trust also takes time. Knowing what they are looking for, what their goal is in terms of their capacity, but also developing a relationship that is based on warmth and on love and on friendship is also important, so that the trust can grow in the business. How can hiring someone help your business? There are other benefits as well. Hiring someone frees you up to be active in other areas of your business, such as marketing or product development. So when you do hire someone, the goal is that it will free you up to do other things that somebody else might not be able to do, that you as the owner or the manager, God as the owner, are able to do. You can train someone in the business so that they can work while you are on sick or on holiday. If you want to be able to get away from your business, you need somebody who can take your place. And so training somebody is important. It takes time, yes, but it will also be helpful for you in case of sickness or vacation. You'll be able to grow more quickly, accomplish more, which will allow your business to grow more quickly. And so having more people who understand what is happening and understand the customer and understand the processes that you've established will allow the business to grow. You can hire specialists to focus on areas in which you do not specialize or do not have time to implement effectively. A lot of people will hire bookkeepers or accountants to help out in that area. Often we don't start a business with the idea of doing the accounting. We know that the accounting is necessary for the business to run. But again, having somebody that you can trust and who can focus in a specific area will free you up to do other things. And so most of this in terms of workplace management is referred to as human resources. You have resources that are made up of humans, and so how do you manage them? So human resources consists of programs, policies, and practices of managing an effective workforce and includes the following. It involves planning, legal requirements, staffing, compensation benefits, training and development, staff evaluation, and employee relations. And this is a critical part of doing business. A lot of people that I've talked to said that they can't grow their business because they can't find employees that they can trust. And one of the things that I always ask back is, how much do your employees feel like you trust them? And how much are they made to feel like they are part of the team? And if they are not part of the team, if they feel like they are a cost of production, if they feel that they are being used and not treated very well, then you will not see a lot of flourishing from them in terms of their developing their capacity and their competencies to be a blessing to the business. And so, as my mother used to say, we point the finger at not finding good employees, but I'm wondering, what are the three fingers pointing back at you saying, how often do you have a team meeting? Even if people are just selling your products on the street, having a team meeting, letting them know what the goals are of the business, letting them know how they stand to benefit if the business grows, letting them know that you care about their competencies and their capacity. So all of these things that we will be going through are helping to contribute to developing a human resource approach that will be a blessing for the employee, will be a blessing for the employer, and ultimately will be a blessing for the business and therefore for the community. So regarding planning, we need to know, what do you want, when do you want it, and how will they do it? And so you need to identify the level of experience, the level of education, or the willingness to train that a qualified candidate should have to function successfully in the position that you might have. So what do you expect? What will be the best case scenario, and what will be the worst case scenario? What is your non-negotiable? They at least need to be able to do A, B, C, but this would be the dream candidate if they had this level of experience, and so on. You need to plan, what salary will you pay? It should be competitive if you want to recruit effective staff. If you are paying very, very low, then the saying is that you get what you pay for. You will get somebody who will also contribute very, very low. And so make sure that you factor that in, that it costs more to have somebody well trained, but you also will get more. And so what is the risk that you're willing to take in regards to that? You need to plan the structure of your organization. Who will the employee report to? Will they report to you or to somebody else? How does that look? What is the organizational structure going to be in the business? And we have legal requirements, and these are the necessary steps to hire new employees within your own government's Department of Business Administration in the city or the county. For example, you may need an employee identification number. You may need to submit records for tax withholding, federal wage requirements, and tax statements. You may need to identify whether or not they are eligible to be an employee. So you may need to see citizenship or a work permit. You may need to report the newly hired staff to the government. They may need to know that you have new jobs created and filled. And then there may be other legal requirements within your context. And so it's important to know what the legal requirements are and then make sure that you are fulfilling those. Staffing, finding the qualified individual to match the job you have available. So you've planned for it, you've decided on who you are the type of person you're looking for, how much you can pay them, who they will report to. You've learned what the government is expecting of you, and now it's time to look for the person to fill that position. And you need to recruit qualified candidates by publishing information about the position. And this is something that we really strongly encourage. Don't just talk to family, don't just talk to friends, don't just talk to your church, but actually put this out there publicly that you are looking to fill this position, because you will get a wider range of candidates, and it may cause you to think differently about your business and its opportunities for growth. God may have somebody out there who he has also been preparing to put into place, and so it doesn't hurt to publish it. You may have more candidates that you need to sort through, but that also is something you need to take time and effort to find the right person. Once you do that, review the resumes or the CVs that are submitted, review the letter of references, etc., and then create a short list of candidates and review those who are qualified. So you may need to come up with a short list of 5 or 7 candidates that you interview and have a formal interview. I did this with my own children. When we were trying to teach them what it was like to have a job, we posted the positions. They had to apply for them. We interviewed them. And then you may need to narrow it down and have a second interview with the top 2 or 3, and maybe bring in a couple of other people to help listen with you to hear and see what you're seeing regarding the person that you might be thinking about. You need to conduct background checks and medical checks on these candidates to make sure that they that they don't have a criminal background, that they will not be a negative force in your business, and as well as medical, that they have clearance medically as well for any communicable diseases. Once you've done that, you make the job offer, put it in writing, sign, and then archive it. Put it into a file so that excuse me, so that you can find it at a later time. And then, if needed, provide a testing period. And that's what we would recommend, again, that you hire a person on a probationary period, 30 to 60 days, so that you can get to know them, they can get to know you. But at any time within that period, if you feel like it's not a good fit, you can let them go without having any negative or anything come back to you legally regarding letting go of the person. Hiring family members should be avoided. Now, there are family businesses that work very well. And if that works very well, then that's great. But more often than not, hiring family members is a challenge because they view the relationship as a family rather than as a formal business relationship. It becomes very difficult to lead, to teach, to have expectations, to discipline, to hold consequences when it's family members. So you can know for yourself, but there is a conflict of interest that other people may see as well, that you are favoring family members, that there's an inequality, even if there isn't one. It may be perceived as that. All right, compensation is very important. Providing pay and benefits to individuals. Attract good employees and retain them. Good employees are necessary for your business to be competitive. Find out what other businesses are paying. Similar size to you, similar work that you are doing. Find out what the average person is being paid to see whether you are fitting into that average. Include benefits for the position. Maybe you can't pay them as much, but you can offer other benefits, whether it's medical insurance, whether it's vacation, time away, whether it's study opportunities. Those all can contribute. Equal pay for equal work. Don't favor family or close friends. Make sure that you have a compensation system that makes sense, that you can easily explain who is getting paid what and why. Conduct an annual evaluation for each employee, including yourself. If you have a board, they should be doing an evaluation on you. You can have your employees give evaluations, have them do it anonymously. But conducting an annual evaluation for each person is very important, and having them start that by have them evaluate themselves for how they are doing is also very helpful. Evaluate an increase in salary by increments each year based on the effectiveness of the employee. And so everybody likes to know that they are climbing a ladder of some sort, and so helping to be able to increase their salary incrementally is also helpful for them. So the staff evaluation, how are they doing compared to what you hired them to do? It's helpful to the employee as well as the employer, since the employee wants to continue improving at all times. There's two kinds of appraisal. There's a measuring of a performance. Did they do what was expected? There can be an appraisal also for further training. What does the employee need in order to do better? What competencies need to be developed? But what's very important is don't wait until the evaluation process if the person is not working well or doing what is right. Correct the problems right away. And that's very important to get things out in the open quickly, have a discussion, talk about a way forward. How can we help you do better? What can you do to do better? And so on. Looking at that face-on and not waiting until an evaluation, which may be 6 or 8 months away. Employee relations, keep good relationships between manager and employees, and that starts with having good boundaries. You are the manager, and it is your job to ensure healthy limits, and that's why hiring of friends or church members or family members can be complicated because it's more difficult to have healthy boundaries there. But as the manager, you are the one that is to ensure healthy limits. Encourage employees by means of the following. Having pay increases, of course, encourages people. Having employees of the month, recognizing certain employees for what they are doing. Having vacation time is a benefit. Affirmation for positive behavior. How are you recognizing that? Titles that encompass their roles. So titles make people feel good about their role. So they could be a maintenance specialist instead of a janitor. And that's another way to help people feel good about what they're doing. And then, of course, a safe and secure environment is critical. It's also critical to respect all of your employees, and then you will receive respect as well. Be very clear with rules and regulations by providing policies of the business. Make expectations and consequences clear. And I've learned this the hard way a few times. We can trust people's goodwill, but we need to put it down in writing, even having people sign that they received it so that at no point can they claim, I was never told, I didn't know, I'm therefore not responsible. Making it very clear, black and white, can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Be fair to everyone with both rewards and with penalties. And people are watching, and so they are watching to know whether you are fair and equitable. Pay people for their work. Be equitable, fair, equitable, and on time with your pay. And so make sure that you're paying people, of course, in a fair way, looking at the minimum wage standards, looking at the fair wage, the living wage standards, being equitable in terms of increases, but also timely with pay. If you can't pay on time, you should also, of course, withhold your own pay as well. Hold meetings with staff at least once per month. Make sure that you have times of laughter together and celebration. Devotions together is also very good, and helping them understand what role they play in the team. Provide ongoing guidance for staff to continue development, letting them identify, especially at their time of evaluation, what they would like to improve, and then come up with a plan for how to improve those competencies. Will be good for them, and it will be good for you. All right, that brings us to the end of the human resources for that part of it, and now we want to look at time management. One of the things in management that's critically important is time management. We all have 24 hours in a day, so what are we doing? And many people are frustrated with themselves regarding a lack of time management, and so we want to look at some myths that people can have. Here we have a guy who says, I'd like to schedule a time management seminar on my calendar as soon as I find time to buy a calendar. And so some of us continue to have struggles upon struggles relating to time management, and we have a desire in our head to do better, but it's very difficult to put that into action. So there are 10 time management myths that I would like to go through, and then I would like you to have some discussion on that. And so here you can see the first one, that number one, we can manage our time. And that's a myth because we actually can't manage it or save it. We can only use it wisely or waste it. And that's important to think. The idea of managing gives us maybe more of a sense of control than we actually have. We can only use it wisely or we can waste it. And so our goal, of course, is to use it wisely. Time management involves getting more done in less time. And that's not true. It's not about being busier. It's about working smarter, not harder. It actually involves getting fewer things done of great importance and setting priorities. So time management does not mean suddenly you're going to be so much more effective in terms of the numbers of things that you do, but more quality and with greater excellence. Third time management myth: to-do lists help get things done. And I would say that that's true. For someone like me, I work well with to-do lists. For some people, though, it's just another task and does not help to actually get a project done. And so you have to know who you are. I'm the type of person that if I do something and I have a to-do list and I do something that's not on the list, I will add it to the list and then strike it off so that I feel good about getting one more thing done. So it depends on your personality. Number 4, people need a personal organizer or other time management to get organized. And there are many great tools out there that can help us be organized, but it's often people are not organized because they use a time management system. They use a time management system because they are organized. I had a good friend who was probably one of the most disorganized people that I knew, and she had just a great desire to learn to be more organized. And she bought so many personal planners and organizers, and I can't tell you how many times she lost them or drove with them on the roof of her car and lost them. And so sometimes those people who use those organizers are already themselves organized, and for some it's just a very difficult thing to learn to do. Number 5, a quiet hour is a great time management tool. And I would say that it is very important to have a time in your schedule where you don't allow for any interruptions, that you work on management. But it's also true that we must learn to be effective in spite of interruptions. We're not able to stop interruptions. Frequently, interruptions are not time wasters, but opportunities that are arriving at inopportune times. And so we need to be able to be flexible with that, but also making sure that we do find time and not every time is interrupted, but that you can balance those. Number 6, keep a time log to determine where your time is going is a good place to start. And that, again, could be another time waster. It should be done last, first put into practice time-reducing techniques, developing effective habits, and so on. Keeping a time log might just keep you busy, but if you haven't put into place good strategies, it might not actually accomplish anything. Number 7 of a time management myth: the biggest time wasters include telephone interruptions, visitors, meetings, and rush jobs. And here we would say, actually, that's part of your job. The biggest time wasters are self-imposed: perfectionism, searching for things, and things like that. We are in the business of helping customers, working with, having our meetings. That's part of what we do. So look for what your biggest time wasters are. Whether you're a perfectionist and you need to have it done perfectly, that can eat up a lot of time. Misplacing things, keys, wallets, and so on, if you can learn some simple tools of organization, that will reduce that time waster for sure. Number 8, it's more efficient to stick to one task until it's completed. For me, that's not true. It may be more efficient to break the project into parts. There are some projects that I can work on for a couple hours at a time, and then I need to work on something else before I can come back to it. So again, it might depend on you. Number 9, we should have one planner for the office and a separate planner for the home. That's a myth. Life integration is best, to put it all onto one calendar and understand that you need to carve out time for family, carve out time for friends, for other obligations, as well as work is important. Number 10, time is money. Time is more than money, it's life. And money can be remade, but you can't remake time. Here we have a person who is being told by their employer in an evaluation: you give 110% every day, 30% to work, 30% to talking about work, 30% to avoiding more work, and 20% to lunch. And so that is 110%, and clearly this person is not very happy with their employee. what we need to do is to look at the work that we do and to categorize it into one of 4 areas. The top left, we see the quadrant where things are important and they are urgent, and therefore we need to do it now. So for example, we need to write an article that's due today. We need to do it now. It's important and it's urgent. On the right side, in the top column, we have what is important but not urgent. And so we need to decide and schedule a time to do it. So it's important to exercise, but it's not urgent. It's important to call family and friends, not urgent. It's important to do some research and to have a long-term business strategy, but it's not urgent. And so we need to schedule that. And again, if you don't put it on a schedule, then there will be things that come up that are important and urgent a lot, but sometimes you need to be able to have time to do those things that are important but not urgent. In the bottom, we have not important but urgent: scheduling interviews, booking flights, approving comments, answering certain emails, social media, sharing articles, and so on. And those are things that we need to delegate. Who can do it for you so that you can pay attention to the things that are important? And then the last one is things that are not important and not urgent. Watching television, checking social media, sorting through junk mail, and those are things that we need to be able to eliminate and somehow provide for that. Dwight Eisenhower, a former president in the US, said, "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." And so that's something that we need to think through as we look at time management. We want to focus in this session again on what is important but not urgent, and that is the planning that we need to do, the preparation that we need to do, the prevention that we do against our risks, relationship building that we need to do, and personal development. These are all important things, but they are not urgent, and sometimes they continue to get pushed off and pushed off, but we need to schedule those things and then hold to it. Work the urgent things around there, but make sure that we can get to those non-urgent items. So some tips: take the first 30 minutes of every day to plan your day and pray for the Lord's healing, leading. Spend no less than 1 hour a week on management issues, looking at the big picture. Schedule that in, make sure it happens. Again, it's important, but it's not urgent, and so we can push it off. But if we aren't doing that, we may miss some key details of the big picture. And then take 5 minutes before every call or every meeting to consider the goal or the focus of the visit. To help you focus, just structure that into your calendar as well, 5 minutes before the hour, that you'll take time to take a look at that. Put a do not disturb sign out when you have to get something done. That's something that I've had to do quite frequently. Turning off the internet, turning off the phone, is just so that you can concentrate for that 1 or 2 hours to get something done. Block out other distractions. And then understand the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. In anything, 20% is vital and 80% is trivial. So that's something that you need to consider. What they mean by this is that, for example, 20% of your staff will provide 80% of your productivity. 20% of your staff will cause 80% of your problems. 20% of defects will come from 80% of problems, and etc. And that's often true. It feels like it should be a lot more equal, but it's not true. That it usually looks more like a 20-80. 20% of your staff will provide 80% of your productivity. You've got some hard workers. 20% of your staff will cause 80% of your problems. There are people that if you watch it, you may see that you just need to let them go. All right, then we want to look at inventory management. 2 more sections yet before the end of this. Actually, what I'd like to do right now is to have you pause and to talk about time management and how to manage your time better, any challenges that you face with that, how you can carve out time for yourself, talk with each other about that, and then we will come back. Okay, we want to continue now with inventory management. And when we talk about inventory, we're talking about the stock that we have. And in your manual, you will see where there are some fill in the blanks. Again, anything underlined is where you can write that in. And so your inventory or your stock represents the total products that you have within your business and can sell at any time. And so that's what we're talking about in this section now. How do we manage the inventory or the stock that we have? Inventory management is the process of keeping track of your inventory. Sounds pretty obvious, right? But sometimes we can lose track of things, of the inventory that we thought we had or the stock that we sold. And before long, it may be a problem for the customer who is frustrated that you don't have what they are looking for. It is the art and science of managing to have the right product at the right time and place in exactly the right amount at the best possible price. And remember, it's a balance. We said earlier that sometimes if you have too much inventory, your cash is tied up in that and the inventory is sitting there, it can become a problem for the business. Why is good inventory management so important? Overstocking inventory or not having enough inventory when needed are two big triggers of business failures. Tools to manage your inventory more effectively are to track your inventory or stock on a weekly basis, so using that as part of your management time, and then create a method or procedure that has flexibility to meet higher demand. So there are two things that you want to avoid, and that's overstocking or understocking, and how to have the right amount is going to take some method. Why is good inventory management so important? Track inventory so that you know what sells quickly and what sells slowly, and then think of your inventory in terms of money, and you want your money working for you. You don't want your money sitting on a shelf. You expect it to be doing something for you, and the same is true for your inventory. Note, if you buy inventory on credit and it doesn't sell, that is even more costly to your business because now you are paying interest and your inventory is just sitting there, so it becomes a big problem. And so there's two key ways of how to track inventory, and this is in your book as well. There are two ways to track inventory: first in, first out, which is called FIFO, or the last in, first out, LIFO, L-I-F-O. So FIFO is simply that you sell the inventory that you purchased first before selling the newer inventory, regardless of price fluctuations in purchasing. So imagine that you're selling bicycle tires, and you buy your bicycle tires at a certain price, and then the price goes up. So what do? Do you sell the last in, first out, or do you do the first in, first out? And so this first one is saying, no, you keep selling the old stock that you have before selling the new stock, regardless of the price fluctuation in purchasing. FIFO users think that this system better represents the way a business moves its inventory. But LIFO means that you sell first the last inventory purchased. LIFO users believe their method is better matches the cost of purchasing. Each business needs to decide the inventory tracking system that is right for them. FIFO is often the choice that businesses use. So staying consistent that you sell your first in is your first out. And then you continue to move your stock that way. If you do last in as your first out, then you may have some things that are getting older, which may end up being problematic. How do you currently implement inventory management within the following? How do you buy your inventory or other things for your business? What kind of process do you have to manage it? How closely do you follow it? And can you identify your key suppliers? And so this would be good to have some time to discuss how do you manage your inventory? How do you make sure that you have what you need? What is the process that you have set up? And how closely do you follow that? Do you plan to change the way you manage your inventory? Is that something you would like to do? How do you plan to change the way you supply your business, if you plan to do that? And how can you safeguard your business by using multiple suppliers? And so there are questions in your manual. These questions are there. So take some time to pause and to have a discussion about this, because again, this is one of the key areas that businesses can have a significant problem with. I tend to be one of those impatient customers. If I go to your place and you don't have what I'm looking for, you're out of stock, I often won't go back. So to me, it's a pretty critical thing that you know how to manage your inventory and make sure that you have what the customer expects you to have on a regular basis. All right, so take some time and have a discussion, and then we'll come back and look at our last section, which is sustainability. Okay, I hope you had a good discussion. We want to talk about sustainability, which relates to the environmental bottom line that we've talked about throughout our classes, our sessions together. And so sustainability is critical for how the earth is treated and being stewards of the earth. In 5 years, it is believed there will be no access to international markets for companies that do not show respect for the environment. It's becoming fundamental to international trade. There's an organization called Sustainability, and it defines sustainability as this, and there's a place in your manual to write the definition, as ensuring long-term business success while contributing towards economic and social development, a healthy environment, in a stable society. And so what we're talking about with sustainability is to make sure that there's long-term business success for you, that you're contributing, again, we see a triple bottom line here, towards an economic development, social development, and environmental development, and a stable society. So what they and most of the world leaves out is the missional bottom line. But really what we're talking about doing is making sure that you can have a successful business while at the same time not harming others to having a successful business themselves in the future. This is a continuum of awareness as it relates to sustainability. The first one is just becoming aware that this is even an issue. There's a lot of internal communication on this. And for some people, that's where they are right now. There's just a beginning of awareness. The second level is now an understanding. So now we move from awareness to having kind of a better understanding, a full picture of what is happening. May have some engagement at some level, some personal experience. The third level then is acceptance. So I understand and I accept that it is an issue. When I accept that it's an issue, then there are some expectations that I may put on myself or on our business, as well as requirements. The fourth one is commitment. Now you make a commitment. So you've accepted that it's an issue, that you are part of the problem, you're going to become part of the solution. Now you make a commitment to what that solution is going to be. What is the application that you will take? What are the systems that you will design, the tools that you will use to help you be involved in this? And then, of course, lastly, we move towards action. And so this is often the path that people take. You can identify for yourself where you are on this as it relates to caring for the environment and the impact that it has on your business and the different options that you have. Awareness, understanding, acceptance, commitment, and action. The most noteworthy reasons for actively pursuing more sustainable approaches to business are to first save costs by making reductions to environmental impacts and treating employees well. And I love this about sustainability, that it's looking not just at saving costs by making reductions to environmental impacts. So saving electricity by turning things off more, reducing waste and reducing what you're paying for having waste being taken away. But it also emphasizes that you save costs by treating employees well. When employees are treated well and they're trained well and you can retain them, it's cheaper than having to keep going out looking for somebody, hiring them, training them, and then losing them again. So keeping employees is part of sustainability. Another reason to have sustainable approaches is that it increases revenues by improving the environment and by benefiting the local economy. And so when you begin to look at sustainable issues, it may actually increase your revenue as well, because people are caring about that. They want to know that the companies that they're buying from are caring about that. And it will improve the environment, and in the long run, that will benefit the local economy. It will reduce risk by engagement with stakeholders. You can reduce your risk by making sure that stakeholders understand what you're working towards, what you are doing, how it is that you are protecting the earth and protecting for future generations. You build a reputation by increasing environmental efficiency. People love to put on their products that they are 50%, the 50% of the plastic that they're using is from recycled goods. Or that they recycle, everything that they use. And so you're building a reputation because people are caring more and more about this. And then developing human capital through better human resource management. Again, it is keeping your employees sustainable as well as important. so that you can continue to grow their capacity and competency and not have to continue to have that turnover. And then there's an improved access to capital through better governance. As you watch and make sure that things are better cared for, you will also be able to improve your access to capital. One of the things that people for many years have thought is that sustainability, recycling, those types of things are for bigger businesses, and they didn't really see the value for small businesses, that it costs money to be sustainable, when in fact it does not. And so this chart shows here that revenue can be increased 9% when you begin working on sustainability issues. That's not a huge amount. But the next one is a huge amount. You have a reduced energy of 75%. When you start watching electricity and other things, when you start saving it, you can reduce your energy bills by that amount. Reducing waste by 20%, reduce materials by 10%. That's going to cut down on your costs, right, for your variable costs. And so when you begin watching it more closely, you will be able to save money in that way. Increased productivity. 2%. So your employees will be able to be more productive when they see that there's also that care. But the reduced turnover is 25%, and so that helps save you a lot by keeping the same people. And so you can see here an increase in profit, and it's a very compelling reason for why we need to be involved in sustainability. Challenges of sustainability: understanding what needs to be done. It is not difficult to reduce impacts, but it does take creativity. The challenges are threefold. A, to inventory and analyze the impacts of the business from the creation of what you're doing, so wherever it started, all the way to disposal. And you might be one piece in that along the way, but to inventory and analyze the impacts of the business on creation throughout that whole period is important. To decide which impacts present the greatest risks to the company, and then to calculate the costs and benefits of addressing them. So understanding what needs to be done takes some planning and thinking and strategizing and coming up with different ideas, and then focusing in on one or two of those as you get started. Another challenge is obtaining accurate measurements and useful standards. Measuring impacts can be complicated, as they may be difficult to ascertain. So how to measure what actually you're using in energy or in materials, and then what your savings will be, that might be difficult to be able to do. And then the cost-benefit trade-off can be unclear. Despite charts and graphs that show the potential economic benefits of sustainability, it's still difficult for individual businesses to measure the cost and benefits of their sustainable program. So it may be difficult to understand it. It still is an important thing to do, and God has called us to be stewards of His creation and to keep this world holy so that He may continue to visit as well. And so it's still important despite those challenges. So your assignment for before the next session is to complete the following: the management team and operations worksheet, having your CV for the key management in the business plan is an expectation. The employee requirements: what are you going to require from your employees? And then also the environmental goal that you may have in light of sustainability. Review what you wrote before and see if you want to get more specific now that we've looked a little closer at it. So that's a lot for this session, in session 11 for management. Next week we will be looking at sources of funding, taxes, and other management things, the last things that we need to do to take a look at to make sure that our business is in good shape. So thank you so much for your time, and may God bless you as you begin to implement this in your business.